Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Ayin Aleph. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi Art Gold in loving memory of Art's mother Shirley Sarah Bat Avraham Bezekarecha on her ninth year at site. She was a lifelong learner, a striver. She sewed and made mosaics. Once her three children were old enough, she went back to school, earned her master's degree, created a career doing social work and counseling, and published 4 books on raising a family. She lives on in the talitot and the quilts she made. Today's daf is sponsored by Devarim Asham Weiss in loving memory of Elsie Muller on her 30th year at site. Elsie was a family friend, 50 years my senior. She had no children of her own, so she adopted my family as hers. We were close friends and we confided in each other. She devoted her retirement to Jewish causes and would be very proud of her adopted children and grandchildren in the USA and in Israel. Today's stuff is sponsored by Tina Lam in loving memory of her mother, Pepe Sanders, Pesha Rivka Bakir, Shana Cohen, and Bina on her yurtzeit. It has been 21 years and my mother's wisdom, kindness, and patience are still my North Star. Today's daf is sponsored by the Schuster family in loving memory of Ozer's mother, Devorah Bat Yisrael. May her devotion to Torah and mitzvot be a merit to the entire Jewish people. Okay, with that, we will get started. Today, our main topic is Ben Sorer Moreh. We're continuing, but we're going to see the two most famous things about the Ben Sorer Moreh. One is a machloket about, did it actually ever exist? Was there ever a Ben Sorer Moreh? And was there ever intended to be a real Ben Sorer Moreh? Or perhaps there was something else going on here. The second fascinating thing, which we're going to discuss at the end of the daf, we really won't have too much time, we'll leave it for tomorrow because it goes into tomorrow's daf, is Ben Sarir Nidon al Shem Sofo, okay, which we made reference to already from the first page of the topic, which is we're really not judging the Ben Sarir Moreh and what he did, more a concern for where he will go in the future and what terrible things might come of this child. So those are our two big topics. I want to just make a correction, and thank you for people who corrected me on it. Yesterday, I said something that was wrong halachically. Avelim can drink wine. It's an onain who can't drink wine. I got confused, right? The onain, which is the time period before the burial. That's when people can't drink wine, but you can drink wine actually during Shiva week. So apologies for making that mistake. Okay. So now we're at the top of our page. We're quoting from the Mishnah. Now we're going to basically bring a braita that says the exact same thing as our Mishnah, other than they quote one more pasuk. Not really sure why the Gemara is bringing this, but we're going to read it anyway. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, you drink any other drink other than wine or eat any other food other than meat, you are not going to be a ben sorer moreh. So you eat meat and drink wine, specifically, Shenemar, Zolel, V'Sovei. They learned from the words in the Pasuk that describes the Ben Sorer Moreh. Even though there's no real proof for this, but because we don't really know what Zolel and Sovei could mean, eating or drinking a lot of something else, well, there is Zecher L'Devar. There is some sort of indicator, Shenemar, Alti B'Sovei Yain B'Zolele Basar Lamo, right, which is a Pasuk we also quoted in the Mishnah, which is, don't be with those who are sovei yain and are zolel basar. And there you see those verbs go together with wine and meat. Ve'omer. Now, usually when they have ve'omer, it means we're bringing a second pasuk to prove the same thing, but it's not what they're doing here. What they're only doing this extra pasuk, you have to wonder what they're doing, but it's actually the next pasuk there. And maybe it's just trying to show how bad those things are. Ki sovei v'zolel yivaresh. Okay, if you do these things, you're going to become poor. Ukraim talbish numa. Okay, numa is sleep, but what they mean here is really laziness. Laziness causes you to wear torn clothes. In other words, laziness also causes poverty. Okay, why they're bringing this, it's not so clear, and why the Gemara even brought this braita when it didn't really add very much other than that last pasuk, which wasn't really part of the proof even. I'm going to leave that open as a question. Amar Rabbi Zera. Okay, now Rabbi Zera just comes, since we mentioned the second pasuk, he's going to darshan the second part of that second pasuk in a different way. Kraim talbish numa. He says it's actually numa again has to do with sleep. So we said it had to do with laziness, but now they're saying kol hayashem bebeit midrash. If you sleep in the beit midrash, torato na'aseh lo kraim shene'amaru kraim talbish numa. He says your Torah becomes torn up. Okay, it's a really bad thing to sleep in the beit midrash. Okay, not so good for all those people who learn all day, where sometimes you just can't help but drowse in the middle of the, fall asleep while you're learning. Anyway, say you shouldn't sleep in the Beit Midrash. It causes your Torah to be torn. Okay, total non-connected to our topic. We're now back to the next Mishnah. Now, as I said yesterday, we're going to get to this Mishnah where it talks about that the Ben Sorer Moreh has to steal. But I want to point out something interesting about the structure of this Mishnah. You would expect the Mishnah to tell you, right? We're going through the details. Now, it never says steal in the Torah. Okay? It says our son, right? They come and they say our son doesn't listen to us, and he's zolel v'soveh, which means he eats a lot of wine, drinks a lot of meat. Okay, what does this have to do with stealing? It doesn't say stealing anywhere. But it's so obvious that stealing is part of it, okay? Because otherwise, you need to find some act that's really a sinful act, even if we're going to judge him based on the future and, that we think maybe he'll be a murderer, and we'll get to that tomorrow. But even not stealing you would have to do something worse than just eating meat and drinking wine in large quantities, which we saw weren't even such huge quantities. So they assume, and it's so obvious that they assume that there has to be stealing here, which first of all, we discussed before, was as if it was obvious to them. And also the Mishnah is going to have a deliberation about what are the parameters of the stealing. But I want you to notice the language. They don't even tell you the Ben Sorer Moreh has to steal. That's how obvious it is to them. That's all I want to point out here. They don't even come and tell you that he needs to steal. What they do is they tell you, who does he need to steal from, and in front of who does he need to eat? That's the deliberation. But it's not at all about does he need to steal or not. And they don't even think they need to tell you a Ben Sorer Moreh is not going to be obligated unless he steals, which you would have expected the Mishnah to say. So from here you see maybe the Masoret, the tradition that had been passed down, was so clear that they don't need to. It's kind of like the Mishnah starts out, the first Mishnah, right? It's obvious that we read Shema. The question is, when do we read it right? It's obvious we read it in the morning and night. And then they just start discussing as if you know the obvious, even though it never says in the Torah you have to read Shema in the morning and night. The Torah does say, but the Torah is talking about the mitzvot, in the morning and at night. And already the tradition turned it into, you have to read Shema in the morning and night. So the Mishnah comes assuming you know those things, and they don't even discuss something which maybe isn't so obvious and needed to be said. So it proves that it was obvious and that this was such a strong tradition, especially being that this never even happened. It's interesting that it's so obvious to everyone because it's not like Shema. I guess you could say people were doing it. So it was clear to them, right? This is not something people were actually doing. But anyway, it was obvious. So let's move on to the Mishnah. Ganav mishel aviv va'achal b'reshut aviv. If you steal from your father, but you eat in the domain of other people, or mishel achirim, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. But you eat in the reshut of your father also. Okay, my mistake. You steal from your father and you eat in the domain of your father. Mishel achirim va'achal b'reshut achirim. In other words, we have two parameters. Where did you steal and where are you eating the food that you stole? Now remember, stealing means we stole money, and right, he steals money and then he buys food and then he eats it somewhere. So can't be that he stole from his father and ate in the domain of his father. We have no idea why, but we're going to get to this soon. The Gemara is going to explain. If he steals from others and eats in the domain of others, also not going to be obligated. If he steals from others but eats in the domain of his father, that's not going to be a din of ben sorer moreh. What do you have to do? Okay, the one parameter we left out, which by accident I said at the beginning, you have to steal from your father and eat in the domain of others. Okay. We don't know why. We'll get there in one more minute. Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda Omel, he's not disagreeing about it has to be stolen from your father and eaten in someone else's domain. That he agrees with, but he says it's not only stealing from your father. You have to steal from your father and your mother in order to become a rebellious son. Okay, so let's get to the Gemara, and then we're going to deal with number one, Tanakama's position and why it has to be exactly those parameters. And then we'll deal with Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, because we're going to have a big problem. What's the big problem with Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda? Well, we already learned in Seder Nashim, we spent a lot of time on this, that the woman's property becomes her husband's property, okay, without getting into the Nechsemalot, Tzon Barzel, and the different kinds. But whatever the woman owns goes to her husband. She makes money, it goes to her husband. So how could it be he steals from the mother? The mother doesn't have her own independent money. So we'll get to that too. So the Gemara first starts with Ganam mishel aviv v'achal b'reshut aviv. Af agav d'shchiach le bait. Okay, we have two issues going on here, and that's going to be the issues with these two parameters. With a father, okay, let's just compare a father to someone else. Is it something that you can keep up stealing if you're stealing from your father or stealing from someone else? So they claim here that stealing from your father is very easy. Why is it very easy? Well, promo to tomorrow's daf, which is going to be about hababa machteret and stealing. It's not so easy to go break into somebody's house and steal something from them, but it's very easy to steal from your parents, right? You're in the house, you're allowed to be in the house, you go around when no one's looking and you steal their money. So Stealing from your parents is pretty easy. So therefore, if the whole concern is this will be the son will continue in his ways, well, then it makes a lot of sense that that will be if he steals from the father. However, there's this other issue of bait. A person is scared of his parents. Okay, Halavai, my kids would be scared of me, but in general, we say children are scared of their parents. Now, also think about it. The child steals money from the father and then brings home this meat to the house, right? All this nice meat the kid bought, and the father will get wind of what's going on and get very angry at his child, right? So the child's smart enough to not do it in front of the father. And if he does it in front of the father, well, it's certainly not going to be something he could keep up. So therefore, avagav de shchiach, that's what it says, even though it's very found, meaning it'll be easy for him to do this, but he's scared of his father. So he's not going to eat in the domain of his father. Again, if he does it once, he's not going to continually do it. And that's the concern. So if he steals once and does it once and eats in the father's domain, we're not going to call him a ben sorer moreh. So now this is the reverse case. Well, avagav de lo bait. Now he's not scared to eat in front of other people. He doesn't have the fear of other people in him. But lo shchiach le. But it's not going to be so easy for him to always be stealing from other people. So he won't continue. If you have both things going on, it's hard to steal from other people, lo shchiach, and then bring it home. Your father's going to say, "What are you doing with? Where'd you get this meat from? Where'd you get the money for this?" And the father will, beat the kid up or something, right? He was scared of the father. Until, right, what's the case? So you have to steal from your father, which is shchiach, it's common, and eat in other people's domain where you're not scared of them. So basically that would be the case, the only case where you could become a ben sorer moreh, because that's the only case where you could continue doing these behaviors. Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, ad shigno mishel aviv umishalimo. Imo manali. Where does the wife have, where does his mother have property? Masha kanta isha kana ba'ala. Whatever she acquires goes to her husband. Amar Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina, misiuda muchenet la'aviv u'limo. He steals it from a meal that was designated for his parents, because a woman is right. All her salary and her possessions go to her husband, but her husband has to feed her. He owes her mizonot. So when there's food for both of them, well, it's equally hers because she's allowed to eat it. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. We said it's not food he steals, it's money for food, right? Ha'amar Rabbi Chanan bar Molad, Amar Rav Huna, we saw this yesterday. Eno chayav ad sheyikneh basar b'zol v'yochal, yain b'zol v'yishteh. He has to he buys the food. He buys it with stolen money. So it's not when he steals the food, it's when he steals money. So we're back to square one. It's from the money they put aside for their food. And then it's equally owned by her because, right, it's going to be money that's going to be used for food that she's going to buy, okay, or that she's going to eat. Second alternative is to say, we learned this before, that someone could theoretically give her money and say, I'm giving this to you as a gift just for you alone. It's like, I don't know, when you buy something as a couple and you put it in one of your names, right? It's just for you alone, and your husband's going to have no rights to it. So even there was a way to do that, okay? Could do it that way. So, but then I'm just going to remind you, and this is going to be our topic in general for today, it's very limiting, because it would be a very unique case. According to Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, he would have to steal from the mother and the father. The first explanation isn't so bad, right? In general, you have money set aside for food. But this would have to be where the woman would have gotten a gift from someone who said specifically, I don't want your husband to have access to this money. It's just for you. And then the son would have to steal particularly that money and some money from the father and, right, all the other details. Okay, new Mishnah. היה אביו רוצה ואימו אינו רוצה, או אביו אינו רוצה ואימו רוצה. אינו נעשה בן סורר מורה עד שיהיו שניהם רוצים. Okay, take any two parents who parent a child, right? Could you imagine them agreeing on anything? So here you have to have both parents agree to turn the child in, okay? I want you to just imagine this scenario. So you have a child who's not listening, and you're having, right, you can imagine the deliberation between the husband and wife, because what are we doing here? It's like the sota. In order for the sota to happen, the husband not only has to be jealous of his wife and all the details that have to happen, but he has to be willing to say, I've got this problem and I'm bringing it in the public. I'm bringing it to the court. I'm telling, right, everyone's going to know about it. It's very humiliating for the husband himself. Likewise for the parents to go, right, you have a problem in your house with disciplining your child. Now you're going to go and bring it to the court and forget about that, right? Both in the sota and in the child case, you're going to end up causing their death. Like here's someone you really love, and you're going to basically, you might get your son killed. So you can imagine the fights going on in the house. Should we turn him in? Should we not turn him in? Right? So you have to have them both agreeing to do this. Okay? If they don't both agree, it doesn't happen. Okay? How do we get this? Because it says, right, in the psukim, it says they bring the son together. Okay, B'neinu zeh sorer moreh, no shomea b'kolenu, all that. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im lo hayta imo ru'uya la'aviv, eino naseh ben sorer moreh. If she wasn't, now this is very hard to explain what this means, and the Gemara is going to struggle with this. If she wasn't appropriate for the father, which we don't know exactly what that means yet, then he's not a ben sorer moreh. So now usually when you say the woman's not appropriate for the man, what we mean is it's a forbidden relationship. So that's what the Gemara says. My ena ruya. What is this? Ilema, we assume chayve kritu chayve metu beitin, right? That he's talking about chayve kritu. That it's one of those relationships. They were, a father and a daughter, a father and or a brother and sister, or something like that. Well, self. So first of all, and what would that mean? Remember, in kiddushin tofsim, they're not really married. But who said they have to be married here? It doesn't matter if they had a child. This child has the father, has a mother. It should make no difference whether they're married or not married. It never says in the Torah the couple has to be married. Ella, so it must mean, now here's not what you would have thought it meant, Ruya Aviv, Bishavala Aviv Kamar. She has to be identical to the father. Okay? What does that mean? Tanya Namihachi. Well, here's a braita to support this understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, because in this braita, it's Rabbi Yehuda speaking, and listen to what he says. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im lo hayta imo shaval aviv b'kol u'b'mara'a u'b'koma, eino na'aseh ben sorer moreh. If the mother is not identical to the father in a voice, now think about men and women generally have different voices, right? Different tones in their voice, different pitches. So number one, they have to have the same voice. They have to look the same, okay, which is quite uncommon, right? Again, what it means look is a good question. And koma, and they have to be the same height. Okay, rare to find a couple like this, which already, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're limiting the case of Ben Sorer Moreh to a really small pool of cases. My time, what's the reason? He doesn't listen to our voice. Now, our voice would have to be the same, right? We speak the same way, and therefore it doesn't listen to our voice as if our voice is like one. Okay, I think about it, right? It's not just the voice, the way it sounds, but it's also, we always think about, right? This is the biggest problem of parenting. One parent says one thing, one parent says something else, right? It creates always a problem with disciplining children that they're getting mixed messages. So there's also a little bit of an indicator of voice, but that's not what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Rabbi Yehuda is saying voice, they have to have the same actual sounding voice. And once you get that the voice has to be the same, okay, there's a jump, but mitkol be'inan shavim, you need the voice to be the same. Mar'ev komanami be'inan shavim. We need also the way you look, and also the way you your height would have to be the same. Now they say, so now being that we've already just really limited this case to almost an impossibility, that's going to lead us to the statement I mentioned previously, which is, now they say kiman azla. So according to who? Kind of like they know according to who, but according to who is this statement said? Haditanya, it says in a braita, Ben Sorer Moreh lo hayat v'lo atid lihiyot. Never was and never will be. There will never be a case like this. In which case, v'lama nichtav. So why was it in the Torah if there'll never be a case like this? Drosh v'kabel sachar. It was so that you can learn it and get rewarded for learning Torah. Now, does this mean just so there'll be more psukim in the Torah to darshan, to learn? Probably it really means the concepts of Ben Sorer Moreh are important concepts about how to parent your children, how to listen, how it teaches you all sorts of values. It's like we talked about the sota. Now, it doesn't say this about the sota, but we said the same thing, right? That it's teaching the woman, for example, not to go speaking to other men and getting her husband jealous. It's kind of telling a husband, don't be so jealous just because your wife's talking to someone, right? This is teaching you values about parenting, about children, about discipline, all sorts of things. And that's why it's here. Okay, so even though it will never actually happen. Kiman, so who does this go like? Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda basically made it an impossibility that you'll never have a situation like this. Ibait Ema, some people say it's also Rabbi Shimon. Okay, it also fits with Rabbi Shimon Detanya because Rabbi Shimon says the following, and here's going to be the other issue as to why, and that's what's the motivator to say this never was? Well, because, and these are I told you these two main issues we're trying today, and here they come together. which is v'chim mipnei she'achal zeh tartimar basar v'shetach lo yain italki avivi imo motzi'in oto l'saklo. It sounds a little extreme. The boy ate some wine, drank some wine, ate some meat, and we're going to kill him, right? It sounds a little bit crazy that this is what we're doing. So this is all just to tell you that Rabbi Shimon also, you could attribute that braita to Rabbi Yehuda because of our Mishnah, and Rabbi Shimon, as Rabbi Shimon appears in this braita, that he also says, right, this whole concept, and if you struggle with this concept of Nidon al Shem Safo, which we'll discuss more tomorrow, that we're judging him based on what he might do in the future, sounds like a crazy idea. You're generally, halacha is such that we only judge you based on actions you've already done. Well, this sort of resolves it because it says, yeah, we're teaching you a concept that don't start doing these actions because it might cause you to do other things, might lead you to other things, and also about disciplining your children. But no one really ever thought that we're going to kill someone based on this, okay? It's just, Torah says it, but it's not that it really means that we're going to do this, which, again, is a whole big question in of itself. Torah says it. How can we just sort of neutralize it and say this isn't really what was meant? So it's an excellent question. But if you were convinced by this, I'm a Rabbi Yonatan and Iti v'yashavti al kivro. Rabbi Yonatan comes and says, "What do you mean? I saw a ben sarer moreh. I sat on his grave. Okay, he was stoned for being a ben sarer moreh, and I was on his grave. So we have a debate here about whether it happened or whether it not only never happened, but never even will happen in the future. And we're going to see the same debate in two other cases with somewhat different people. We'll see. Kaman az lahadetanya. Okay, there's a braita that says, and according to who does this go? Ir hanidachat lo haytav lo atida liyot. A whole city that worships idols, where we basically kill all the people, remember, and the city gets burned. So never happened and never will. V'lama nichtava drosh v'kabel sachar. Again, it was written in order to get reward for the learning, and again to teach a value. Kiman, according to this, go Rabbi Eliezer, Detanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Okay, now we're going to see a different opinion, Rabbi Eliezer, about hanidachat, and he's going to do the same kind of thing of Rabbi Yehuda, make it virtually impossible for this to happen. Says, Kol ir sheyesh ba afilu mezuzah achat inana tzeit hanidachat. If there's even just one mezuzah in the city. Now, what kind of Jewish city has only one, right? Has no mezuzahs in anybody's house? Once there's one mezuzah, we don't do the hanidachat. Why not? My time, Amar you have to take every possession in the city and burn it. And what do we know? You're not allowed to burn the name of God. Where do we learn that you can't burn the name of God? Okay, that's a continuation of the pasuk, which talks about the pasuk before, says, Abed to Abdun, you have to destroy Shmam, the name of all these idols. So then it says, but don't do that to God. So it means you can't destroy the name of God. So therefore, if there's one mezuzah in the town, we don't do hanidachat. And comes Rabbi Yonatan again. He's the one name that's going to repeat here. Magically, he happened to have seen also the ben sarer and sat on his grave, and he saw the hanidachat and he sat on the mound after the city was destroyed. Okay, right? Whether this is true, not true, the coincidence that he was in both of these places is a good question. Okay. Kiman az lahadetanya bayit haminugal lo hayav lo atilio. Now we're going to have a third, a leprous house. Never was, never will be. The lamanit rash, navlinichtav. Why was it written? Drosh v'kabel sachar. Kiman, according to this, go Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. Third opinion. Ditnam Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon omer lo olam in a bayit tamei ad shiur yireh k'shtei grisin al shtei avanim b'shtei kotalim b'keren zavit. Okay, again, he makes it almost virtually impossible. He says you need 2 grisim. That's a measurement of like a bean size. Okay, it's going to be 2 by 1 gris. Where the way it's going to work is you're going to have shtei grisim on 2 avanim, on 2 stones, on 2 walls. And where would that be? In a corner. So you have the corner, you have the stones from one wall and another wall. You have a 1 by 1 gris on that wall attached to the 1 by 1 gris on the other wall. So that gives you a 2 by 1 size of the leprous mark, and that's the only way you can have a bayit menuga. And that's very unlikely you're going to have it exactly on the corner there where it's going to expand, right, stretch to both sides and be that size, even though the size isn't so big. But the idea is that it's very unlikely that would happen. My Talmud Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, where does he get it from? Ktiv kir, uktiv kirot, because first it says it's on a wall, and then it says it's on two walls. How can it be on two walls and be on one wall? Ezu kir shu kikirot, where do you have one wall that's like two? Aveomer is a keren savit. That's in the corner, because it's as if it's on one wall. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok, Makom haya b'tchum Aza. Okay, speaking of Aza, and you can read Shula Mishnah's article about Aza today. There was a city in the area of Aza, Vahayu Korinota Horbata Sigirta. It was the Horba of Abayit Menuga. So here comes someone, it's not Rabbi Yonatan this time, somebody else who says, I saw it. There was a place, there was a Abayit Menuga, and it's a destroyed house. You know, I saw the parts, like the destroyed stones from this place. Or the truth is, he doesn't say he saw it, but he said there is a place that's known as the Horba of the leprosy. Rabbi Shimon ish kfar Akko, another person said, now here he says, okay, so one was a destroyed house, and the other one talks about, I went to this place and I saw these stones, and they said, oh, those are stones that were taken out of the house of a leprous house. So we have two rabbis here saying leprous house actually did happen, or again, we have Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon, who basically makes it virtually impossible for it to happen. New Mishnah. More limitations on the Ben Sorel Moret. And this actually we learned previously. We learned on Mem Hey. We're talking about a different sugya. We'll reference it soon. Okay, if one parent didn't have an arm, didn't have a leg, was mute, blind, or deaf, no ben sorer moreh. Why? Shenema v'tapsubo avivimo v'lo gudmim. They have to grab him. They can't grab him if they don't. One of them doesn't have a hand. V'hutzioto. They have to take him out. They can't do that if they can't walk. If they don't have a leg. V'lo green. Amru v'lo ilmim. They have to say to the judges, our son is this. If they can't speak, they can't do it. B'neinu zeh. They have to point to their son. If they're blind, they can't point to him. They can't see him. And okay, v'lo suma. Einenu shomea b'koleinu v'lo chershim. He doesn't listen to us, which is not if they're deaf. Now here it's interesting because he's the one who's not listening. But how did they know he's not listening? Because they don't hear. Right? They hear him not listening, or something like that. Okay, and not deaf. Okay, so now all those things, that means because Torah describes how the process is supposed to be done, if they can't do the process, remember we learned this with Yada Edim Tiebo B'Rishona, and if the witness, this is by the stoning we learned it. When they stone the person, the witnesses have to be, their hand has to be in it from the beginning, first. Now, if they don't have a hand, then actually the person doesn't get the death penalty. And then we got into this whole sugya. Does that mean that every time the Torah speaks, right, and says something, a description, it has to happen exactly in that way? So we're going to get back to that in our Gemara as well. And in fact, this is just a repeat of the sugya there. We'll get there soon. Now we continue in the process. So the son's not listening. What do the parents do? Matlimbo b'fnei shlosha. They warn him in front of three people, which Gemara is going to say you don't need to warn in front of three people. We'll get back to that. Umalkinoto, and they give him lashes. Okay, the court gives lashes. Chazar v'kilkel. If he continues, then we no longer do it in front of three, because remember there's a beit din of three for lashes. Then we have to go to the court of 23, because now it's going to be dinei motmanot, dinei nefashot. Now it's going to be capital crime. So it starts off, the first stage, he gets lashes. If he continues in his bad ways, right, and continues to steal and buy the meat and the wine and drink it and eat it, then he gets judged in the court of 23. Another limitation. Three of the original judges need to be there. Where do we get that from? It says this son, which means this son. When they say this son, they mean this son that you saw already. So in the 23 judges, three of them have to be the original judges that saw this, the first stage of the process. Okay, later the Gemara is going to say, how do we do b'nei nuzeh and darshan two different things, right? We said they're not blind, and we also said this. So we're going to have to get back to that. So now the Gemara says, going back to the other sugya, the Gemara starts off and says, Shmat Mina, you can learn from here. Be'inan kraki diktib. This was a whole question on Daf Memhe, which is, do you have to read psukim exactly as they are? Can we prove it? Because there was a machloket about if the aid is missing his hand, can you execute this person or not? So this would be a good way of saying, oh look, the Mishnah clearly says has to be exactly as it's done. And we actually brought this there as an attempt to prove that. But just like the Gemara rejected it there, the Gemara rejects it here. Shanehacha turning out amabet. This is different. Dikule krayaterahu. This whole pasuk is totally unnecessary. The Torah didn't need to describe the process at all. When the Torah says these, this is the way it happens, it doesn't mean necessarily has to happen in that way. But when there's a pasuk that's totally unnecessary, because of course the parents are going to bring the child into the court, they don't need to tell you that, right? We don't normally say when someone steals. So we see somebody brings maybe the person who was stolen from brings the guy to court, right? We don't usually get a description of that. Totally unnecessary pasuk, and that's why it has to happen. It's teaching us that it has to happen in this way. But it doesn't mean that every pasuk in the Torah every time it describes something, it has to happen exactly in that manner. Okay, there we had a much longer sugya, and we brought other cases as well. Here we're done with the sugya, and we're going to move on. Matrim b'fnei shlosha, lama li b'trei sagya, right? Who says you need to be warned in front of 3 people? Normally you need to be warned in front of 2 people. Amar Abaye, hachi kamar. Abaye says this is the way to read it. Matrim bo b'fnei shnayim, umalkin oto b'fnei shlosha. They fix it. They said, no. The warning is done before 2. When they bring you to court to get lashes, that has to be done in front of a court of 3. Now we want to know, how do we know the ben sorer moreh gets lashes? Malkopa ben sorer moreh hechiktiv. It never says the son gets lashes. So they say kid Rabbi Avau. Now they're quoting Rabbi Avau, who was talking about something else entirely. So just so you don't get confused, Rabbi Avau wanted to prove that a motzi shemra, that's a man who says his wife right after they get married, and he says, oh, I thought she was a virgin. Now she told me she was a virgin. She's not. And he makes a big spectacle of it. And if he was lying, he gets lashes. How do we know he gets lashes? That's what Rabbi Avau comes to teach us. So he says, it says in the pasuk by the Motzi Shemra, v'yisru. Okay, it's a word v'yisru, which also appears by the Ben Sorer Moreh. So he says, the v'yisru of Motzi Shemra, we learn mi v'yisru, v'yisru, of the Ben Sorer Moreh. Now, how do we know the v'yisru in the Ben Sorer Moreh? Okay, that's what it says. Okay, so when after the parents come and bring them to the court for the first time, this Canim do v'yisru. Now, how do we know what v'yisru is? So they say, well, Motzi Shemra, we learn from Ben Sorer Moreh. Ben Sorer Moreh is Malkot. We teach from there to the Motzi Shemra. That was what Rabbi Avau was coming to teach. But the question is, what he continues to explain is, and this is the part that's important to us, how do we know that v'yisru in Ben Sorer Moreh means lashes? So, and then v'yisru, how do we learn the v'yisru from the Ben Sorer Moreh that means lashes? Mi ben, because he's called a Ben Sorer Moreh. Uben, okay, that didn't teach you anything yet, but ben mi bin. What's bin? Because they look the same, even though they sound different. Vaya im bin hakot harasha. That's the pasuk about lashes. It says when you hit the rasha, okay, meaning when you punish them, the judge puts him down on the floor or puts him down somehow, hits him according to what he's deserving of, which in the end they say is 39 lashes. But the point is the bean. Okay, so now we're going to start from the end. It's going to be much easier. Bean is in the context of lashes. We teach from there to the Ben Sorer Moreh. What word shows Ben Sorer? And then we're going to say v'yislu must be the lashes that he gets that we learned from the Gzera Shava between Bin and Ben. And from there, we're going to do another Gzera Shava all the way to the Motzi Shemra. But the point is, we don't really need the Motzi Shemra. It's just that we quoted Rabbi Avau to show how we got to lashes by the Ben Sorer Moreh. Chazar v'kilkel nidon b'esrim b'shlosha. So now if he does it again, he's right. He continues his actions. He goes to a court of 23. That's the next part of the Mishnah. So again, I told you we're going to ask this question. Hamibayle zevelosumin. B'neinu zeh. We just darshan 2 different things. We learned parent can't be blind, one of the parents. And we learned that the judges have to be in the 23. There have to be 3 of them that were in the first, saw him in the beginning. So they say, well, in came lichtov b'neinu hu. Could have just said b'neinu hu, this son. My b'neinu zeh. In other words, why didn't they say who? Why did they say zeh? Shema min hatarte. Okay, this is a classic method of dealing with 2 things in one pasuk. We say, well, it could have worded it differently. From the fact that we're it this way, we are able to learn 2 things. New Mishnah. This will take us almost to the end of the daf. Bit of a different topic. Barach ad shalom nigmar dino. What if we bring a Ben Sorer Moreh to court? So we're done with the whole process and all the details that have to happen. We bring him to court, but he's not yet convicted. Okay, they haven't yet issued a psak din. This person's supposed to get killed, and he runs away. And why is this significant? Well, they find him, but achar kach, by the time they find him, he keeps sakana tachton. He already ages out of the age range in which he could be a Ben Sorer Moreh. Patur, at this point, they can't judge him anymore. Fascinating, because he did the action when he was liable. But since now he's no longer in the age range, you can't you can't punish him. Again, another limitation. But if the court had already issued their verdict and then he ran away, then it's a different story. He keeps the kantakton. If already then he had the hairs that make him age out, chayav. Okay, by the time they find him, he's too old. It doesn't matter because he was already judged to be killed. So at this point, we can still kill him. So we can't issue a ruling about a son who's past the age, but we can, what's the word? We can put into action a ruling that was already in existence. So now our topic for now is going to be some other statement entirely. Gemara is going to bring in a statement of Rabbi Hanina. We're going to try to either prove or disprove his statement, either support it or reject it. Okay, first we're going to take the first part of our Mishnah and try to say, oh, same thing. And then we're going to say, this could support, the first part of our Mishnah could support. Then they're going to take the second part of our Mishnah and say, wait, but the second part of this could actually raise a difficulty with it. And then we're going to bring, okay, and each one we're going to reject. It's not going to be either, the comparison is not going to be a good comparison. Then we're going to bring two other sources. So it's going to be A, B, B, A. It's going to be first support, then reject, then support. And that's basically going to take us to the end of the daf, almost to the next Mishnah. So I'm a Rabbi Hanina. Rabbi Hanina now comes and says, Ben Noach sheberechet Hashem. This will be a great review of all the Ben Noach sugas we did. A Ben Noach, a Noachide, who berechet Hashem, he cursed God, which is, remember, sayif, you get killed, hereg, okay, decapitation. V'achar kach nitgayer, but he wasn't ruled yet in court. They didn't finish the ruling. And, okay, we don't know if he even went to court or not, but whatever it is, now he converts. He's patur. Ho'il v'nishtana dino, v'nishtana mitato. Okay, you have to really add a vav there, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Since his deen is different, now Rashi reminds us what that is. It means the rules for a ben Noach are different. You only need one judge, right? Not a court of 23. You don't need warning, right? Judah needs warning. And there's all sorts of things, right? Also, yeah. Right. You could accept one witness, or in our courts, if once they're Jewish, you need two witnesses. Okay, there's all sorts of differences in the deen, and there's difference in the death penalty. Instead of getting sayif as a Jew, he would get a harsher punishment of stoning. So he's totally exempt, which is crazy. It would actually be a good motivation for someone to convert, but hopefully they don't know this halacha. So now, basically, since everything shifts, also the rules of judgments and also the death, basically he's exempt. To which they say, Nema Meseale. Why don't we try to support this from our Mishnah? Now, remember, he runs away before there's the verdict, and then his situation changed. He's exempt. So this looks like the same thing. My time, don't we say because he changed, this is his body change as opposed to a convert becoming Jewish, but also you have to remember also a convert is like a katan shenolad. It's as if they're a new person that's born, which makes sense. Also, we kind of wipe out their past. So they won't get killed. Here also, there's a bodily, right? There's a body change here that's happening, and the rules change as a result. So sounds like the same thing. And he's patur, so this would be a good support. To which the Gemara says, lo, shane hachan, it's very different. Di avid hashda. If the Ben Sorem did it right now, like now he keeps a kantachton, they aged out. If they were to do the action now, what would happen to them? Nothing, right? They're not a Ben Sorem, they've aged out. So therefore, la barkatalahu, and that, right, if he had done it now, he wouldn't be chayav the death penalty. Whereas the convert, if he were to curse God now, of course he'd be liable to the death penalty. He gets stoned. So it's not a fair comparison. You can't use this case to prove that because that, right, our case went from stoning to nothing. That case goes from sayif to stoning. So that wouldn't be a fair comparison. You would think all the more so there, maybe he should get the death penalty, and therefore you can't prove this from here. Now we're going to move to the second part of our Mishnah and use it as a difficulty on Rabbi Hanina. Tashma, right? So here you have a case where he actually does get the death penalty even though his status has changed. So maybe that would disprove. But obviously here the answer is clear. Nigmar dino kamar to nigmar dino gavra k'telehu. Now the whole reason for the Sefer Bar Mishnah is because it was already a verdict. Once there's a verdict, you're considered a dead man. So it doesn't matter if your situation changes. You're going to get killed anyway. That doesn't prove anything against the case of this Gentile who converted, because the Gentile was never convicted as a Gentile. If he was convicted as a Gentile, then maybe it would be a different story. He would get the death penalty as a Jew. But if he wasn't convicted, then, right, it's nothing. So that didn't raise a difficulty at all, even though we thought it did. Third source, difficulty now. Tashma ben Noach, now we're going to a different topic. Ben Noach shehikat chavero, which means he hit his friend, but it really means he killed someone. So he killed a fellow Gentile. Ubal esha chavero, or, it's not end, or he slept with a friend's wife, v'nit gayer, and then he converted, patur. But asa can be Yisrael v'nit gayer, hayav. But if he did it to a Jew, meaning if he killed a Jew, or if he slept with a Jew's wife, then converted, he'd be liable. Now, why is that? The reason is because if a Jew, now here it's a little tricky, and it's a little hard to swallow this, but a Jew gets the death penalty for killing a fellow Jew, not a Gentile, and also gets the death penalty for sleeping with someone's wife, but only a Jew's wife, not a Gentile's wife. That's the part that's hard to swallow, that we get capital punishment for killing a fellow Jew or adultery with a fellow Jew. Now, therefore, the way this works is if the if the person converts to Judaism and the action they would have done as a Jew, if they were a Jew, they'd be obligated, then they'll get the death penalty. If the action they would have done as a Jew, they wouldn't get the death penalty, then they don't. So if they did it to a Gentile, when they were a Gentile, when they convert to Judaism, they're not going to be obligated because as a Jew, they wouldn't be obligated. Now that seems to go against Rabbi Hanina, because Rabbi Hanina said, right, he was talking about cursing God, which you'd be liable as a Jew or as a Gentile. So theoretically, you should get the death penalty. So that's the problem. So now they say, right, shouldn't you just say, according to Rabbi Hanina, once you convert, we don't look at what you did. It doesn't matter. If now you would have done it, you'd be obligated. It's irrelevant. Because again, nishtana dino, nishtana mitato. So now we're going to see, is this nishtana dino, nishtana mitato? So it is dino, because again, there you would have been judged in a Ben Noach court. Here you would have been judged in a Jewish court. But mitato is not. Dino, mitato be'inan. You need both to change. V'hai dino ishtane. Again, this is incomparable. Here the din changed, but mitato lo ishtane. Why mitato lo ishtane? Well, let's go to the death case. What does a rotzeach get, a murderer? Saif. What does a Ben Noach get? Saif. So there's no change there. That's why he gets killed. Now, if you know enough, you'll realize there's a problem here, though. Bishlama rotzeach, so the rotzeach makes sense. Mikar saif, hashta saif, but eshet ish, mikar saif, hashta chenek. But the eshet ish, it does change, because there it's chenek. If he was a Jew, it would be chenek. And if he were Gentile, it's saif. So it changes from saif to chenek. Why is that not like, so that would be a question on Rabbi Hanina. When the death changed, he said, you're not obligated. But first answer, Benaram or Asad, maybe the Eshet Ish case is a betrothed woman, where it's skila in both cases. Remember, we learned that because there is no erusin there's no such thing as engagement, halachic engagement by Gentiles. So maybe it's where it's going to be the same penalty, and therefore a Ben Noach gets actually stoned for that. So they say no, because ha-sachim b'Yisrael du miyad eshet chavero katani. No, they said if you do it to a Jew and you do it to a non-Jew, and they have to be comparable. And there is no case of erusin if he did it to a non-Jew, because there is no erusin in outside of Judaism. So that is a bad answer. But we have a different answer. Ela kalaba chamura meshach shaycha. In this case, we started with when he was a Gentile, he was supposed to get chenek. Now he's supposed to get, when he was a Gentile, he was supposed to get saif. Now he's supposed to get chenek. Now, chenek is less than saif, remember? It's according to Tanakama, the main opinion. So they say, right, in the first case, we were discussing Berech Hashem, which went from saif up to skila. That we're not going to give you a harsher punishment. But the lower punishment is included within the harsher punishment. So if we're going from saif down to chenek, like in the Eshet Ish, then that's included. And then you would get that punishment. And therefore, again, these are not comparable. And therefore, it's not a difficulty. But that obviously is only going to work on Yichal Rabbanit, the Amr Saif Chamor, who say that Saif is actually more strict. Rabbi Shimon, Amr Chenek Chamor, Ma'ika Lamemar. But according to Rabbi Shimon, who said Chenek is Chamor, how can you explain it? So Rabbi Shimon Savar la Ketana de Menashe Damar Kol Mitam Mu'ala B'nei Noach Eno Ela Chenek. Remember, there was an opinion that says Eshedish gets Chenek, that everything is Chenek for a Gentile. So therefore, the Eshedish works perfectly now. Chenek, Chenek, and then we're good. Except we're not so good, because if he gets Chenek and then he murders and he's supposed to get Saif, well, now we're stuck again. Okay, but this is going to be the same kind of answer. If we're in the track of Debei Menashe, according to Rabbi Shimon, and we're going to say chenek for that, and that's why it's the same death, so that's why he'll get killed. But what about the rotzach? It starts with chenek and moves to saif. But remember Rabbi Shimon, chenek is more severe than saif. So that's included within it, as opposed to Rabbi Shimon, who went up a level to skila. Okay, going down, you could go down and you will still get the punishment. But if it means more severe punishment, we're not going to give you the more severe punishment at all. Okay, last source, Lema Mesayele. Here's the support. We're talking about a Nara Murasa, Sarcha, Ba'achar Kach Bagra. Okay, this is very similar to the Ben Soreh Moret. She was of the age, remember there's a very small age, just 6 months, Nara. If she then Bagra, before they ruled against her, Tidon B'chenek. So she gets Chenek. So now you see, even she doesn't get skila anymore. Okay, now here it's a little tricky because she does get a punishment, but the point is she gets the newer punishment. So now, b'skila my time alola mishum dehoyel ve'ishne ishne. Why doesn't she get stoned? It must be because she changed, and then there also change, and you don't get the same punishment. V'koshaken hacha de'ishne legamre, and all the more so here, where the Gentile, where they convert, they're like a totally different person. But Ha'amar le Rabbi Yochanan, you can't use this because Rabbi Yochanan said Latana to the person who brought this braita, Tene nidon biskila. She doesn't get chenek. You should read it as she gets stoned. In other words, it was a mistake with the braita and it really should be stoned. She gets the exact same punishment, and that therefore doesn't prove anything. Okay, because then there wasn't a change in anything. She actually gets the same thing, and you can't use this as proof. So all the 4 sources we brought in the end were not comparable at all to the convert. Okay, we'll quickly finish up this next Mishnah. Ben Sorer Moreni Don Hashem Sofo Yamut Zakai Va'al Yamut Chayav. Okay, he's judged based on what he will do in the future. We'd rather he die now before he has more bad deeds in his under his belt, so he'll get much more punishment in the world to come. It's like a whole issue about the world to come here, and won't die with terrible sins on him. Now we get into a whole comparison of tzaddikim and risha'im. Death of bad people is good for them and good for the world. It's good for them because they won't have more sins to be punished for later. And it's good for the world because they're a hazard to society, which is another reason why we kill the Ben Sorer Moret. Tzaddikim, if you kill, the death of tzaddikim is ra lahem, bad for them because they can't do more good deeds that will go in their merit, stand in their merit later, and ra la'olam because they're not doing good things in the world. Yayin v'shena l'rishayim, if rishayim drink wine and then fall asleep, it's hana'a lahem, well, they enjoy it, and they'll do less bad actions, and hana'a l'achirim, because they're not hana'a la'olam, because they're not walking around the world, they're sleeping. Litzadikim ra lahem v'ra la'olam, but for tzadikim it's bad for them and bad for the world because they're not going around doing good things and not getting more good deeds. Pizur l'rishayim, another thing. Pizur, separating rishayim, is hana'a lahem v'hana'a la'olam. It's good for them and good for the world because the more they get together with each other, they do more bad things. So again, we want to limit their bad actions, so it'll be good for them in the world to come, and it will be good for the world in general because they're not doing bad things. U'litzadikim ra lahem v'ra la'olam, and also for tzadikim, keeping them separated is not a good thing. Kinus l'rishayim, in that same note, gathering together rishayim is ra lahem v'ra la'olam, because they can do a lot of bad. Litzadikim hana'a lahem v'hana'a la'olam. For tzadikim, it's good for them to get a lot of tzadikim together, and they'll do good things, and it's good for the world. Sheket l'rishayim, quiet time, ra lahem v'ra la'olam, because they start thinking up bad things. Litzadikim hana'a lahem v'hana'a la'olam. Quiet for tzadikim is good, then they can learn more, they can do good deeds more, and it's good for the world. Okay. With that, we finished. We'll get back to that Mishnah tomorrow. So we did today. We limited the Ben Sorer Moret to the extent that we said it really maybe never even happened. And then we got to, we discussed a lot of different limitations. And then we got to this case about the kid aging out. And then we compared it to the convert case. And then we really didn't have any good comparisons to the convert case. And then we ended with this idea of the Ben Sorer Moret being judged for what the Ben Sorer Moret will become. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone another complicated day. Wishing everyone a good day and b'sorot tovot.